We all had little steam banks in our front bedrooms and were cutting film as recently as 20 years ago. So it's amazing how fast things have progressed in a short space of time. And it was very nice and simple in some ways. Film was tactile, real, and now we're dealing with XML files, MTS files, MVI files, and a whole lot of weird and wonderful codecs. And not so long ago, we were all working in editing facilities where we had technical support around the corner, often in the next room, but now no longer. We've pretty much got our own little setups at home. And, well, Andrea, you describe it as exhilarating and nightmarish in equal parts. So I think, let's hand over to you first up. You can maybe describe why it is that both nightmarish and exhilarating.
Hi. Look, I started editing in this hideous moment between the lovely world of film and non-linear, when it was all tape to tape, and tapes were numbered and they were in a box on the side, and it was all reasonable, and it was horrible cutting because you just never could move things around. But technically it was okay, and we took our discipline from film editing in terms of the way the rushes were organised, and people knew what that discipline was because there had been assistants in living memory who'd been on film and got the training. It flashed forward to the last job I had, which is a brilliant job with a deliciously deranged director, which is the ones you want, and walks in with a drive, 5.5 terabytes size, shot over 5 years by himself, largely. 700 hours of rushes, an extra 2.5 terabytes that he doesn't tell me about till quite a long way along. Lovely surprise. And in folders that are of his own making and, sort of his own imagination as well. So then, so the drive arrives. I take the job. It's great. It's an international co-pro. It's, as I kind of... It sort of dawned on me that it was in fact in foreign language a little bit along. So I was in Khmer, which I'm not familiar with, but Mark is, which is the director. But unfortunately he wasn't there at the outset of the cut. So 16 weeks scheduled for a feature and a television version of this film. And here we are, 26 weeks later, and nearly locked off. And I think one of the really major things that's happened to editors is that we're a little bit like ASIO agents. I did a documentary actually with Mark, that's how we got started, called Persons of Interest, and in it one of the ASIO operatives who'd been around since the setup of ASIO said, look, it's all fine, you can get all sorts of data in, but somebody's got to analyse it, and someone's got to make up the story. And I think, I don't like to say it, but there's a fair similarity between us and ASIO. We're all a bit pervy. We like to see everything, and we have to make a story up. And that's sort of the big problem, because nowadays ASIO's got a massive building in Canberra, huge, and we've got probably still just one editor and maybe a ring-in assistant for maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks of an edit. And then you're on your own. So when we did this ASIO thing, I met Mark, and he was just starting out doing with his vision about what was needed in the business. He could see it coming. And in fact, he kind of named my company in a way. I'm cut, and from rushes to final product. And I think that's probably wasn't rushes to delivery. And that's kind of what we have to do now. We have to be in at that point and out at that point as editors. Whether you're actually servicing the whole way, but mentally you've got to be in it at that point and out at the other point. And I suppose that's one of the big things. And for me, and the other thing is to think about schedules and the bigger issue about, do we ever get given enough time? So that's my major thing. Is that 5 minutes? Have I blown my wad? I can talk more.
Well, do you want to make a few more points before Mark starts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the big difference with documentary rushes is that if you compare them with drama, who've got the same problems. They've got, many cameras rolling on one or two things. But they do have a script to run off, and they do have a bigger staff, like they've got a bigger editing department to help manage these rushes. So they probably have the same number of rushes, like 600 or 700 hours of rushes for a feature or something like that, I don't know. But for us, the problem is that it's literally moment by moment. It's going to be different. They don't. You will get, you know, somebody's rolled a bloody iPhone on the same thing, which might be magic, might not be, probably not. But you're going to get little bits of everything all over the place. And I think of it like trying to write a haiku out of about 4 sets of dictionaries, some of them in another language as well. And you're trying to get it down to one thing, but the word could be anywhere in that big range of stuff. And that's both the horror of it, but then if you get a director who knows what they've got, which I must say isn't that common, knows actually all the rushes, then you can be like I was with Mark, this director, where I would just say, did they ever talk about, you know, blah? And he'd go, yep. And I'd say, where is it? And he'd go, broken flower. It was that kind of weird, broken flower, okay, broken flower. And there would be a folder called broken flower, and there it would be. And then he had to translate it for me, and we'd put that in for the time being. But, you know, it's really, really time consuming. And you work it over, and I always, with a documentary, you really want to work it over so much in the rushes that you get to the end of the cut and you feel like you've given it a really good shake, and you're looking through the rushes and you're going, nah, it's not as good as what I've got, nah, it's not as good as, and you really feel like you've wrung it all out. And I'm afraid when you're dealing with 700 hours of rushes, or even 400 hours of rushes, it's just getting harder and harder to get to that point. You keep tripping over things that are great, and it's just really frustrating. But so the exhilarating part is that everything's in there, and if it's not in your 7.5 terabytes of rushes, it's up in the internet in the form of web stuff. And the frustrating thing is that as well, you know, and you get given these insane schedules. Just as a postscript on that schedule thing, there's about a week, I think we were about week 15 or something, and the producer, who hadn't, it was more the creative producer, was talking to somebody from Screen Australia about the cut, and he said, you know, I'm really worried, you know, where we're at and stuff like that. We're at week 17. And the person from Screen Australia said, well, what is it? And he said, it's an international co-pro, it's a feature, and it's in Cambodia. And the guy said, week 17? Where are you? Nearly at rough cut. He said, that'd be right. 26-week edit. So they know what's going on, but it's the broadcasters that are the ones that are saying you can't have more than 14 weeks, and what are you asking for? You know, anyway, that's the beef of it.
Okay, fantastic. It was a great introduction. Thank you. Some good issues. Mark,
yes.
Over to you.
So my name's Mark Stewart-Pearson. As Tom said, I worked in IT for a while. I didn't think, well, I worked in IT for at least a decade. I thought I was a musician, but in fact I was a computer programmer. I hated computer programming. I hated the companies I worked for, like IBM, Macquarie Bank, NRMA. When I saw editing being done, I had a real revelation. That's what I want to do. I was lucky enough to get retrenched from Macquarie Bank with a sum of money, and I set myself up as an editor. And it was great. I thought I'd escaped, but unfortunately the world of data came back and grabbed me, and I ended up being sucked into a world with Apple. Spent a lot of time. Some of you will hate me as the person who led the team that installed Final Cut at the ABC, which is still being used, and probably still people, and that was about 7 years ago. People are still hating me for that. But that was part of the future. Apple lost interest in that, but that was part of the future. So I'm just going to talk a little bit for about 20 minutes about using data in post-production and what's good about it and what's bad about it, and just have a little quick thing about the NLEs we're using nowadays, which will probably start off some interesting debate in the panel section. So first of all, we have to manage the risks. We never had these sort of risks, and it's not something that editors do naturally. It's actually quite hard if you're a creative editor to manage all that stuff. But there's a few things that are really important with data that you can do, and it's really important that producers know about managing the risk as well, and they often rely on their senior editors to tell them what they're supposed to and not supposed to do. So hopefully this will help you a bit. I actually do courses at Afters in the open program. I do one called Demystifying Data, which is sort of aimed at producers, and I talk for 7 hours about data. So, which there's quite a lot of talking about data, but I won't talk for that long today. I'll just hit a few points. The one thing I always talk about is redundancy. We have to try and make the virtual data that just sits somewhere on those drives, we have to try and realize it to make it physical. So one of the important things is we have to have this idea of redundancy. We have to have 2 copies of everything. That's really vital. And that's quite an old concept in IT. If you've heard of the word RAID, R-A-I-D, and I often in my courses say, does anybody know what it means? And usually nobody does. I'm not going to ask you because there's too many people here. Might start a riot. But what it stands for is redundant array of inexpensive disks. And it's really quite a fundamental concept of what we're doing when we're storing data. Back in the 70s, the people creating the early computers had this idea that you could either make a very expensive, perfect disk that never failed, or why not make inexpensive disks and make sure you have redundancy. So that's why the concept of RAID came. And the idea is, and so when you go out and buy a hard disk, you get an inexpensive disk. It is inexpensive rather than an expensive one. And it comes with a guarantee. And you think, wow, the manufacturer must be really behind this product because they're giving a 3-year guarantee, a 5-year guarantee, and that sounds great. But they do honor those guarantees as well. And so if a drive fails, you go back to the manufacturer and they will always replace it, no questions asked. But the problem is, you say, I don't want the disk, I want my data. The data is your responsibility and you have to manage that redundancy. So that's very important. And so you have to have multiple copies. And you also, hard disks cannot be relied upon. There's only one long-term solution for storing data, and enterprise, big companies have used lots of different things. They've all come round to this one thing, which is LTO tapes. LTO tapes are relatively cheap. You can get an LTO 6 tape which holds 2.5 terabytes of data for around $100. I mean, it just sounds fantastic. That's what I want. And you can stick them on a shelf, and they're not guaranteed to last for 30 years, but they're archive quality. They're designed to last for 30 years. Fantastic. Where do I sign up? But unfortunately, the drives will cost you $10,000 or so. And so, so most independent, you get to a certain size, and you have one, you automate, but smaller setups, obviously $10,000, what can I spend it on? An LTO tape drive or food? Probably food. And so we have this idea of backups or archiving. It's very important with data that we are aware of something called high availability, that it's all very good having backups of everything tucked away, but if your main editing stuff fails, how long does it take to get everything back again? Which can become a real crisis. So it's good to have things like RAID 5 drives where one drive fails, the thing keeps on working. It's not so good to have non-RAID drives but backed everything up to LTO tape. When one of the drives fails, all the data's gone. We've got the LTOs. You get the LTOs and it would take, days, weeks, particularly if, as is more and more common, you have 700 hours or more of footage, because there's no limit to how much data you can shoot. And so always lots and lots of footage. So that's a bit about the risks. But on the good side, there are benefits. We can realize benefits that we could never do before. Now, when I worked in IT, my specialist area was databases, big, huge databases, managing lots of data. And that was fine. The little bits of data they were handling was bank account numbers and balances. Now we've got to the stage where computers have moved on, got bigger and bigger, when we can use those techniques to manage our video files, which are huge, which, if you went to somebody in, maybe not IBM, but if you went to somebody in Macquarie Bank or the NRMA and said, we've got a few files, there's about 1 terabytes worth, they'd be shocked. That's huge amounts of data. But we're now doing that. We're moving that data around. We can use those techniques that have been around a while. And there's a new, and what we do is we use something called metadata to manage these files. And metadata, I've been giving these sort of courses for years, and people had never even heard of metadata. Everybody knows what metadata is now, or do they? But in this particular case, all it means, it's very simple, it's data about data. We have our primary data, which is the video, and then we have the metadata about the video data. So it's quite a simple concept. And we have a new class of programs to manage that footage with data, and they're called digital asset management programs or media asset management. And we haven't used them it's quite new. The actual idea of digital asset management has been around for quite a long time. Newspapers and broadcast stations have used them, and they've been very, very expensive tools. But of course, it's the nature of it is that it's getting to the stage where we can manage, independent producers can get into the game. And when you have got 700 hours of footage, I think in a few years' time, that's how we're going to be managing it. Without a thought, we're going to go into our digital asset management program like CatDV or Axel Video, and we're going to log all our footage, and we're going to be able to find things really, really fast, and we're going to make that data much more usable. So that's all about metadata, and so it's very important as editors you make sure that metadata gets captured on set when it can be. There's an awful lot of metadata going into cameras, and an awful lot more that can be going into cameras, and so it's important to make sure that as an editor you have some say in production. Often you don't. I mean, Andrea had the case of the Cambodian project where she wasn't even on the horizon until they'd actually shot for years. And we've seen that. Actually, it's an important point. we've seen that quite a few times, haven't we? What happens on set is that the production crew, for very good reasons, only trying to be helpful, they come up with a way to organize all the footage. And they come up with these lovely hierarchies. They give you a hard drive with a folder full of days, and then within days there's different types of cameras, and within different types of cameras there's bits and that, and some of them are called Untitled. That is not what we want in post-production. What we want is exactly what we had when they were shooting video and when they were shooting film. We just want a big pile of cards, reels, videotapes, all with a naming convention that makes sense to post-production. That's what we want. So it's really important that you get that fed into production, because it makes life a hell of a lot easier in post-production. We've got digital distribution at the other end that gives us, as documentary makers, a potential audience of the whole world that we never had before. There are things like Distrify and a number of other companies coming up that allow you to control the distribution yourself. So instead of being in Australia and looking at distributing in a very narrow cast way and having to have projects which have quite a broad appeal because the market is so small, you can approach the world. And other examples are iTunes and Netflix. And one of the interesting things about those alternative distribution platforms, which aren't yet a place you can make a living, but in 5-10 years' time, they will be a place where Australian filmmakers are making a living. Those alternatives are really pushing the boundaries of the technology. Netflix and Amazon demand that if you have a program for them, it has to be in future, it has to be finished in 4K. And whereas in Australia, we're still delivering in standard definition for the broadcast market. So it's very interesting where that's going and where the products, we're still going to be making documentaries, but how they go out to our audience is going to be very different. So that's a little section on benefits and risks, and now I'm just going to talk a bit about NLEs, our editing programs, the tools we use. And I think it's very important to know that those editing programs, whereas 5-10 years ago we had the Avid, it was a computer that did nothing but edit. They're just software programs that run on a computer, often, in your front room, like where the Steenbeck used to be 20 years ago. And that's the future. It's everybody can edit on their computer. Any computer can do the editing. And we have to realize that. There is a hankering after, the days of lovely edit suites and being looked after, but those days are gone. So, first of all, Apple FCP, which as documentary makers you're probably very familiar with, because it really empowered a whole generation of filmmakers to make stuff themselves. And so you guys probably, a lot of you are still using FCP7, and it's very hard to change. But sadly, it's 5 years out. I made my career out of it as an editor. But it's 5 years out of date, and it just doesn't cut it anymore. That's a very lame pun. I spontaneously came up with that. But it's really got left behind. It hasn't been touched by Apple for 5 years. All the cameras that have come on since then, even things like DSLRs, which are just such plain, simple cameras for us to use and the footage for us to use. FCP7, we have to transcode everything. Stuff that comes from GoPros, we have to transcode it. We waste enormous amounts of time processing all of that stuff, and it's just not necessary now. And it is hard to change, but the benefits are huge. And so you just have to give it up. We tell stories now by grabbing things off YouTube or the web, throwing them in the timeline, cutting holes in them, fading them in, fading them out. They're just lumps of media that we're moving around. And FCP10 is a tool for throwing bits of media around in a creative way where you can focus on being creative rather than having to be a master of your tool. So I think people are going to be using it more and more in the future, but at the moment it doesn't work in teams. It's designed for somebody who, an auteur, somebody who goes out and has a vision and shoots stuff and then comes with their and then gets their laptop and edits it and presents you with the final result, whereas we're still a team-based thing. It makes the media transparent. For instance, it does all that transcoding. It still requires the transcoding that FCP7 does, but it all happens in the background. You don't even really have to be aware of it. You can get red footage and 4K footage, and it will automatically turn it into standard definition stuff or whatever your computer will play. So it's great, but I don't expect you guys to jump on it because you're used to working with a source and a canvas, you're used to working with a timeline, how it works, and that's great. You know, there are solutions for you. And one of those solutions is Avid. And I do work with Avid. I provide support for a number of companies that use Avid. And I hate it. I hate it so much. It is so wrong with what the media should be. And I know editors love it, particularly editors who've worked with it for years. But I think they don't love the software program. And Avid are selling it now as a piece of software you can put on your laptop and use anywhere. What people love, and I can really appreciate it, is the big environments where the cutting edge is, the frame set and match, the spectrums, where you have huge hundreds of thousands of dollars of Avid hardware connected. You have teams of technicians keeping it going. You have people bringing you cups of tea. You have people treating with editors with respect, which you just don't get when you're working on your iMac at home. And that's lovely, but it is very, very expensive. And at the end of the day, what value does it add to the story? So it is what it is. If you've been using it for a long time and if you have a big budget, and you really need that hardware to make it work well. It does not work well on an iMac or on a MacBook Pro. It's designed to have assistants working and doing stuff for the main editor. That's the way it's designed. It was designed. It was a fantastic piece of groundbreaking stuff back in the early 90s. They solved all sorts of impossible problems, but all those solutions are still there. The idea of separating the video and the audio was great when your hard disks were so slow that you had to have your audio in a different place from your video to actually replay it, but it still works like that. And that is so frustrating when, as a storyteller, you want to manipulate the footage and you want to just grab the audio and video and do something in After Effects with it and then have that appear in your timeline. It's just not possible to do that easily with Avid. And it's got all that stuff in it, and it's sort of dragged down by it. It can't handle 4K natively. And cameras, all cameras will be 4K. I believe this camera here, shoots 4K. It's not going to go away. And we, as editors, are going to have to deal with that footage. On Avid, Avid's only solution is an online-offline workflow, which is perfectly reasonable in some ways, but you know, there doesn't seem any reason. We know computers will get faster. Avid have lost a lot of technicians. It becomes very hard for them to evolve their product. They have a small market of professionals who are small, and they need, as a professional solution, they need to provide some sort of superior product in order to keep the professionals. But the problem is, with FCPX and Adobe waiting in the wings, is they have huge markets, they have huge budgets, and they, you know, as soon as a new camera comes out, yes, we support 4K on the Sony A7S. Just as simple as that. So I don't see a future for Avid, but I can see why people are going to keep using it. I think ultimately Avid the company will fail. It doesn't make profits. It keeps selling things off. I know they're the company that develop Pro Tools, and all sound editors use Pro Tools, but how often do they buy new equipment? I'm sure you know, you always have to provide stuff for the sound guy in old formats because they haven't upgraded in years. So I don't see a lot of future for Avid, but I do see a lot of future in the near term for Premiere. It's fantastic for editors who've been working on FCP7. It's very, very familiar. It's you know, it doesn't involve having to think much at all, but it's got all wonderful modern things that a program that's being developed now can do. It takes those files that come out of the camera, all those complicated structures, and just turns them into clips. You just import a card from the A7S, you import a red mag, you import a card from an Alexa, you import a DSLR, and you're editing straight away. You don't have to think, oh, do I transcode this into ProRes LT, or you know, should it be this, that, and the other? It just works with it, and you can get on with being creative. It's got simple ways of sharing projects, so I think in the short term, I think it's a really good solution, and they've got a relatively cheap subscription model. So yes, I think that's what you should be using in the short term, and you will find it a huge relief if you are on FCP7. The pain of staying the same is worse than the pain of change. It is horrible changing your tool, but I think you will find that the pain you are struggling with in working with FCP7 and perhaps even Avid are cured by Premiere Pro. And I'm sure that's going to be quite contentious, but I guess that's what we've had to talk about. I've come to the end of my talk.
Already.
I've run out of slides. Thank you.
Well, look, thank you for inviting me to be here, and a great presentation from Mark, who's covered a lot of what I would have liked to have said. I think talking about the metadata, and I think he was alluding to George Brandes coming later to explain it to us.
You should have had that up on the screen.
naming is really important, and you get so many lock-off 32s or Final Cut 1, and they all just become a C. I get them relentlessly from everybody. I have to keep sure that every project is kept sort of in its own data space, so that nothing, otherwise, everybody's lock-off 1 becomes the same. Premiere Pro. My history is kind of funny. I started in online. 1-inch tape was brand new when I started, and so I followed that through. Then Betacam was groundbreaking, and then Betacam SP, and then eventually we got into digital. And about that time I went freelance, and I became Dr. Analog for a while, because all my peers were out pursuing non-linear, which I found back then, the late 80s, early 90s, to be slow and awkward and a very sort of circuitous route to getting to where you wanted to end up. And then suddenly, freelancing for a company called Visualize, which I think many of you remember, and they got a Quantel system. So I went straight into digital in a fairly deep way, and missed out on any experience with Avid or Final Cut Pro. Final Cut I learned a little bit, but even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, I read a blog where the guy said, well, if you want to make DVDs, you need to get Encore. It's a really great Adobe product, and you get Encore DVD. It only comes packaged with Premiere Pro. And so while you're loading the Encore program, you can use the Premiere Pro discs as frisbees to amuse yourself while you're waiting. But in just a very short time, it has come an extraordinarily long way, and I've just fallen in love with Premiere Pro as well. Its capacity, as Mark was discussing, to farm it off to effects and back, get things done in Photoshop or your graphics. The integration is really terrific. And look, in a way, the conclusion of it could be doing me out of a job, because ultimately it gives access to everybody to the sort of tools that have been out of most people's reach until now. So I guess it's just a matter of patience and how much time you want to spend learning how to polish, which is, there's always been that delineation between editing and polishing. And I've come to love grading, which I find as a great way of polishing.
I think we should make a difference between craft editing, which is spending weeks and weeks and weeks finding a story, telling tales, and polishing that story, which is, it's perfectly valid that that's what you do, Roen, and you don't have the interest in doing the fine polishing. You like finding the stories and telling the tales, and I think those definitions are very valid and will continue. Basically, it's two types of, it's the right brain and the left brain. I'm not sure which one's which, but no brain, yeah.
So, with the Adobe approach to post-production, which I'm, as I said, quite in love with at the moment, the anxiety I have about it is that it could become a bit of a Woolworths approach to post-production, where it's all just laid out. That now that it's a subscription process, it's taken the pressure off Adobe to keep coming up with new features to sell an upgrade. So far it's been a bit over 12 months since they released the subscription approach, and they've been really great at coming out with upgrades, and sometimes every few days, you get an improvement. And they're very responsive. They've got blog sites and forums where you can go on and ask for things or ask for help.
They're all on Twitter.
Well, I'm still a bit steam-driven. I am a bit steam-driven when it comes to Twitter, I must confess. So, yeah, the anxiety is that Adobe will become complacent once they've got everybody who wants to do any post-production. Then they don't actually need to upgrade anything because they've got everybody. And you know, what you know is as good as it gets, you know, until somebody comes along and tries to show them up. But so far that isn't the case, so, and that's great. The future, well, in terms of data storage, and as Mark said, RAIDs are great because you've got some sort of security in your software. But now from my point of view, things like USB 3 and Thunderbolt mean that you can bring your hard drive into me because that hard drive is now fast enough. And in the cost breakdown, you know, you used to spend a lot of money to buy hard drives that were fast enough to edit from, and then you could be cheaper having storage for archive that's sort of at a further distance. In the fullness of time, it'll all be the same. So, you know, the redundancy is a really important thing. I live in fear whenever anybody brings me a hard drive because I worry, you know, is this the only copy of this data? And, you know, it terrifies me. I talk about it with my insurer and, you know, if my building collapses or through some inadvertent, and touch wood, I haven't had any inadvertencies so far, but, you know, to lose somebody's data would be a tragic thing. And so I don't have the means to back up everything that everybody brings me because I just don't have the digital real estate. But getting back to what I was pushing was that you can now have a hard drive that has been your hard drive all the way along, and then you bring that to online. And we can now just plug that in and online straight from your hard drive. And then that's a glimpse of a future which would be NBN is coming, I hope, one day. You know, that if you've got some favourite colour grader in Helsinki, you know, well, you can get him online. You know, you might have to get up at 1 a.m. to watch what he's doing. But, you know, over the internet, this guy could be grading your program.
They've already built that into DaVinci. In fact, you can have 2 copies of DaVinci running in either side of the world with your grader driving it, and the DaVinci that the producer is sitting at is seeing the changes as they happen. You both have to have your own set of media, but it does work like, it is designed to work like that. So it's quite an exciting, and I think there's a lot of future in the internet, but I don't think we're going to be seeing much of it in Australia. Well, in the near future.
Thank you, Trey.
Yes, sadly.
I'm not sure how much more I've got to add, unaccustomed as I am.
No, rather very exciting. Thank you. I think Roen's one of the few people that spends weeks on grading a feature doc, not just days. So
that could be seen as good or bad, Tom.
No, but the result is extraordinary, and it's something that cannot be reproduced by the editor.
Well, it's hard to.
Doesn't have the patience, doesn't have the skills.
It's hard to colour grade to a Bundy clock. You know, it's really awkward to have people pacing up and down worrying about, you know, $10 a minute or something.
Yes, I mean, you're a Frank Seven match, you're looking at it all the time, and the result is, in the end, not nearly as good.
That's very kind, thank you.
I've actually written something because I'm not very good speaking off the cuff, but it's a little bit more of a kind of prosaic look at my journey in the last period of time as I've gone from being, well, it starts basically back in the 70s when I was an assistant sinking rushes and joking about wouldn't it be great if we could take our Steenbecks and pick sinks down in enjoy being out in the sunshine and get out of this room. And that was a joke at the time, but I couldn't have imagined that the changes in the medium that would make editing as portable and as fast as it is now. So I actually find the technology very exciting, and it is daunting, as Andrea's pointed out, but there's always amazing people that can kind of guide us through that. I used to love film. I used to love handling film, and it was a kind of a sad day when I stopped cutting. I cut my last film. It was see you later, and I went into videotape, and it was a period of kind of it was a nightmare period really. It was the dark ages, and I remember doing stuff with Roen where we'd come in and we'd have sheets of paper with numbers of the time code written down, and we'd sit there and read out the numbers, and it would take...
Andrew used to sit at the back of the online suite cross-legged with an EDL, and he'd tick things off as he saw them go down, and he'd go 12 an hour. 12 an hour. Yep, that's the cut rate at the moment. And so the whole thing was swapping 1-inch reels. I remember.
Yeah, but we did some jobs, I remember, where we did them through the night. So it was like, we've got to get this through. We've got to be out of here at 9 o'clock in the morning. Let's get those. And you had your assistant changing the 1-inch reels, and it was extremely time consuming. I mean, it's probably almost impossible to imagine now what we used to do. But
it's so expensive.
That was the way it was done. And now it's kind of organising and cutting your images, dancing your fingers across the keyboard. We actually take that for granted. In the digital age, the sheer amount of footage that people shoot has slowed the process down again. Film was costly, but the ratios were small, 10 to 15, 15 to 1. Now the ratios are more like 100 to 1 and counting. The camera's left running, the director's shooting, they're just miles and miles of footage, data that probably you don't really ever need to visit, but it's there, and it's taking up drive space, and you've got to get through it to find those gems. Back in the old days, we used to sit and watch the film rushes. We'd sit there and we'd watch everything. It was part of the joy. You'd watch everything that was shot, and you had it in your head. That's now impossible because of the sheer volume. And as editors, we have to rely more on the directors to know the material and find those primary moments. Directors also, I had a job that I did last year. My director was like my assistant, cutting together little assemblies for me. There's no way we could have got through the material otherwise. We've lost the immediacy of contact with the core material. I've just taken my edit suite on a road trip on the current project that I'm working on with David Bradbury and Jenny Day, who's the producer. Starting at my home in Willoughby, down to a drama shoot in Camden. I took down my iMac and 2 Stardom drives, which were like 12 terabyte each. I was down there for 4 days, and then I was back in Sydney and then up to Mullumbimby with the drives for another 2 weeks in the car, sitting on the back of the car, hopefully not hitting too many bumps along the way, because I have had that experience driving back from Mullumbimby where I did lose a drive that was actually brand new. That I opened it, I started it up in Sydney, and it just failed. After Mullumbimby, I packed up the suite again, the edit suite, and I was in Sonar down the road here in Fox for 4 weeks, and then we took the edit to Vietnam for 4 weeks. I packed up my iMac into a suitcase with another monitor and all bits and bobs and cables, and got that through and opened it up in Hanoi, and it worked. It was fantastic. I was so excited. And then I was there for 4 weeks. It was it was a fantastic experience in terms of getting the Vietnamese perspective on the film. And then I brought it back. I'm back in the edit suite in Sonar for the next 2 weeks to finish the film off. And it's been an amazing road trip with that film. Last year I did a project called The Vasectomist, which was shot in the Philippines and Haiti and the US, and we had like 8 or 9 different formats, and then we had to decide 6 months out what we're going to do about that. I'm a Luddite, I'm still cutting on Final Cut, so everything had to be converted down to ProRes.
Question I was going to put to you.
Yeah, so that was fine, and it was worth kind of doing the planning, and the assistant that worked on the project in New York, everything was sitting in ProRes, and I had a clear run through the project. It was a dream, really, in terms of the technical side of it. So I've gone from being very fearful of the new technology and all the new formats to actually embracing them, and quite enjoying the prospect of probably jumping onto Adobe. I'm just waiting for that right moment to shift onto it. And these days my best friend is Google, because that's where I get all my technical advice.
One thing you spoke about was, which I think is important, and I wish I'd mentioned it, is we, as editors, when I worked as an editor, I found it very hard at first, and then I got the knack of it. As editors, we take in a lot of information at the start of a project, and we hold it all in our heads. And at the end of the project, we dump it all for the next project. And that was part of our skill. But what's happened is that skill's been completely overwhelmed by the content. You could do that with 100 hours. You can't do that with 700 hours. And so that's why we need to start thinking about the tools like digital asset management systems that will allow us to get some of it out of our brain, but to keep that information there, to summarize the information and have it quickly available, and also available like Google, where you do just search for stuff and things come up. They're not exactly what you asked for, but it's enough to drive you on the quest to find the thing you know is there. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, thanks.
I had to make a big decision last year, so I Facebooked everyone. And most people said Avid, so I went with Avid. And I started on a film in February, Catherine Millard's Shock Room at Macquarie Uni, and they had 10 cameras, and thank goodness there was a technical person there, and he sunk the whole thing up for me and organised it all into group clips. Otherwise, there's no way I could have worked out how to do it. But that's the first time I've had anyone of any kind of an assistant type for eons, since I cut a drama, really. So I've gotten used to Final Cut 7 and working out how to do everything myself. Grace's film last year was mostly made from YouTube clips, which I illegally ripped. And then, of course, once we found the footage, I had to iMatch it. I felt like I'd gone back 25 years. But that seems to be happening a lot. The film I'm cutting at the moment is on Final Cut 7, so I've got Final Cut and Avid on my computer. I didn't want to go back to Final Cut, but he'd already spent 5 years cutting it himself. So that again has got acres and acres of YouTube archive, random. It's a complete nightmare. Lovely guy, but complete nightmare. All the footage has long file names that begin with M and end in 7 or 20,000. And I just wonder what's happened to the assistants, because it's getting really hard to... I mean, directors aren't meant to be assistant editors, as far as I can tell. They've just got a different mentality. They're thinking about something else. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that because I keep doing all these indie docos and people don't have any money, there's no producer. And when it comes to the online, I've moved on to my next film, and there's only so much post-production translation I can do, and there's no person in the middle to push it forward to the next, to take over. So I then have to take all this on board, all this technical stuff and what to finish on, and that's also been really hard as well, especially with lots and lots of data. Yeah, but at the moment I'm stuck between got one foot in Final Cut Pro and the other foot in Avid, and had actually for a while been cutting the two films at the same time, and that was really difficult. And now I wish I just had got Premiere, but maybe next film. But it's almost like you need to be able to use all three.
It's just a piece of software. It's just like Word now or something like that. The important thing that you do is tell a story, not operate the machinery. Traditionally, it was an editor was partly a machinery operator. And that, I think the important thing that the editor does now is tell the story, and it's just a slightly different tool that they use, but I think we're getting more and more used to being able to tell that with multiple tools. And it's also very important.
I don't agree. I don't agree. I think, you know, what you really want to do as an editor is just have that transparency where you're doing the job, you're looking at the screen, you're not doing, you know, and you can't do it across that many
Multiple
platforms.
different tools.
You
That's
just
why
don't have the
CPX
bandwidth
is out
for
the
it.
window for everyone who's been doing it for a while.
But then, I mean, to some degree, and not wanting to just say no, but more like Mark's saying, CMX isn't that different to Final Cut Pro or Avid or Premiere Pro. The tools, everything you need to do to edit is within those programs. The thing that they do for proprietary protection is name them different things. And it drives you nuts because you can't even pick up a manual and go, what's the trim out slip function? Because they call it the cut out trim function, you know. But it's the same function. And, you know, once you get to realise that it's a car, the manufacturer may not call it a steering wheel, but it's a steering wheel. Or an ignition.
No, but you don't want to be going, hang on, where's the gear shift in this one?
Yes,
That's right. I know. So it's about
while you're thinking about the story.
it's familiarity, and you don't want to have to sit there going, oh my God, I was just on
You want to
a
focus
flow,
on your
and
creative,
now I've got to go and look up.
Avid have a habit of shifting things around in different menus and things, and it's got to be here somewhere. Where did they hide it this time?
Yeah.
I map every single keyboard the same way across all platforms. Probably everyone does that. They're completely incomprehensible to anyone else, but every single time I get on any of those things, I just map it, you know, in, out, blah, 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 and try and find the same key settings. Yeah.
One thing I'd say is that having just a minute ago saying they're all the same, say they're all different. CMX, Avid, Final Cut, you can see a progression of the whole idea, the paradigm of the bins, the Steinbeck style 2 monitors, but what's happened is when editors start using things like FCP, and FCP7 even, we start throwing things in the timeline, we start grabbing things from anywhere, and we don't care if it's a piece of footage, whereas the CMX Avid thing was very much about telling a story by putting one piece of material one after another. And I think the future is that we're going to be telling our stories just by throwing stills, throwing bits of animation, putting it all together, cutting holes in it, dropping stuff through, having multiple things. So there is a progression, and they are all different, I guess I'm saying after that.
So,
Yeah.
but I think one of the things that I find, particularly with FCP7, because it is that old and whatever,
Yes.
it's nice to get everything into ProRes.
Yes.
You've got YouTube, you've got everything
Yes.
else, you bring it in, you standardise that.
Yes.
It runs so nicely.
It does.
And in that format, are you advocating mixing formats?
I am. I wouldn't have thought it would be
Happy to
possible. Avid gives you something they call AMA, where they say you can use all the formats straight out of the cameras, but my experience is it doesn't work. And not only does it not work, it actually works fine when you start off looking at the rushes and you've got all your long got camera footage. So, and plays fine when you're near the end of the edit and everything's cut and the computer's having to create frames, it all starts falling to pieces. But my experience with Premiere is it's actually very good. They've gone to a lot of trouble to make it.
You're not transcoding.
Not transcoding.
I think one of the big differences between FCP and Premiere is that FCP handles the MPEG formats. Premiere, did I say
Yes, Premiere handles them.
The MPEG
FCP
format
doesn't.
like it's not happening.
It's just some other piece of footage. You don't have to think about it.
I'm sure everybody kind of knows, but an MPEG compression goes across maybe 16 frames, 12 frames, 16 frames. And so there's no frames. It is the first frame as a full frame, and then each next frame as the changes from the first frame, right? So you can't go to frame 8 and put a cut in because there's no frame there. It's actually just a continuation. So now look, my technical awareness isn't that good, but Premiere Pro, sometimes when I'm using it, I can see it struggle and it jitters a bit. And then it goes, right, here we are. Oh, my computer's all right. But, I mean, only in terms that you can see sort of a bit of jitter happening sometimes where you don't expect to see jitter. And I think that's what it's doing, is undoing... Yeah, you don't get a crash. It's opening the MPEG sequence and turning it into frames just so that you can put an edit there. Whereas Final Cut Pro 7, now, I mean, I don't know X at all. I don't know Final Cut Pro X, but I have heard that Apple have put most of what they took out back in if you're determined to go and dig for it.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, all of the being able to export
Sharing
the metadata,
stuff,
sharing, apparently it is buried in there somewhere, but you know,
It's a
that's
very
only
different
hearsay.
world.
Interface is the hard thing.
Yes.
For most of us who have come from
Definitely.
source record,
Definitely.
canvas, whatever you want to call
Definitely.
it, timeline, that works really well for
Yes.
just about everybody, I think, except for the 16-year-olds who are coming through on
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
and don't want to change from it. Whereas it seems to me, I haven't really worked on Premiere Pro, but it seems to me that the switch from FCP 7 to Premiere Pro is almost seamless.
It's seamless. I don't think anybody here would find changing to Premiere Pro any kind of challenge at all. And I'm not being paid by Adobe. I don't think Mark's being paid by Adobe, but it just makes great sense right now.
Multi-formats in the timeline, what version are we talking about that starts to work well?
In Premiere Pro? No, you only get the latest
Yes,
version.
if you sign up for Creative Cloud, you get the latest
Yeah,
version.
if you're like me and you haven't signed up to Creative Cloud yet because you've got 6.
Oh, well, 6 is pretty there.
A lot of
Yeah.
file formats, but the question with all of this still goes back to, it doesn't matter the ease of editing. I still find it's time and time again managing the bloody files. You're importing them natively, but if you don't manage them properly in the first place, it can still go arse up. And and you've got large volumes of this material. And back to the question of backing up. Setting up correct protocols so that you have got an exact copy of your massive project somewhere else, not under the same roof, secured somewhere, that you can restore really easily. And without assistance, it's a big job for an editor.
And it distracts from the creativity.
You put in a lot of hours managing the files. It is good to keep up to date with all the NLEs. I do agree with you. But I still think that good editors could still, are doing it possibly a bit slower, but they're still doing great work.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that.
Definitely.
No doubt about that, yeah.
But you also pointed out that it might be one of the things is the NLE isn't the perfect way to manage all the footage.
And I like that idea of the metadata.
Yes.
Because you can get your assistants to put in a lot more metadata.
Yes.
But then in, for example, Premiere, how do you actually, you can search,
Yes.
can't you?
It's a crap
various
search.
names and it
Yes.
will load up.
What you can actually do with Premiere is they've also, Adobe are really putting a lot of effort into it. They have the ability to open another program in a browser window. So for instance, there's various digital asset management programs that will open as a browser window within Premiere, and you can search your footage. You can have, because it's like a server-based, the whole idea of digital asset management system is it's server-based, and you're actually running a client, and there's lots of people accessing the same data in a central repository. You can have your assistant doing logging, and you can have logging done in the field, all going in there. And as an editor, you can search that, and you can search across all the footage and all the logging notes that are put in. So there's very much that structure is being developed. It's not there yet, but...
That really begs the question. I mean, if we've got someone who's been shooting it themselves for 5 years,
yes.
They started out on DV and they've got, you know, XD cam or whatever.
Yes.
The last thing they're thinking about is actually entering metadata into the thing. It's almost like, you know, one of the most useful things that could be done. When I was at Afters, we ran a course called pre-production for post-production. Basically working out the post-path for each project. Now, this business of wrangling data is potentially enormously powerful, as you just described, but it's not going to get there, because it can do it, but nobody's going to put the stuff in unless they're really conscious of it to begin with. It's almost like one of the most useful things that our funding bodies could probably come up with is an office where someone says, I've started, or I'm about to start shooting something. Okay, let's just get this mapped out before you go. And yes, you will change cameras all the way down the track, but if you know, we're now on files, we're on cards, we're doing this. Okay, so how are you going to back up that card? Are you going to, you know, whatever? I mean, it's actually reasonably simple to do that. But these people are focused on story and not technically inclined. But they could do with a little bit of hand-holding to begin with, and it seems to me really good investment that it is just an office where they can check in first.
This is a problem. A lot of producers and directors now setting directors do a rough cut, and they don't do that. You know, they don't label things.
No.
It's all a big mess, but when the editor gets it.
But imagine if they had entered this metadata. Imagine if they didn't have keywords.
I've done all of this. What you're just saying, like I've got a documentary I've been shooting for 4 years, and I've got a very good naming system. I've got very good logging files in a database. I've got 3 backups under different roofs.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling pleased. I'm feeling like it wasn't a waste of time.
No, you did well, and you will make life a lot easier.
What NLE are you using?
Sorry?
What NLE are you
FCP7, because that's what I started digitizing the material.
Well,
It's going to be around for a while.
you know, there is the screen editors, and it sounds as if it's an industrial issue that editors should insist on. I mean, if it has to come from the editors. You want to bring me a job? Well, everything needs to be like this. I mean,
A standard format.
But that's great. But I think Denise Haslam wrote an article back in the early 90s, which was called The High Cost of Low Budgets. And, you know, one of the important points she made was if you shot 400 hours of footage, well, what's that? That's 100 weeks of somebody watching it.
To see it all.
You know,
and then to learn it.
And then if they're typing in keywords, then that might be 200 weeks, because that takes time to dream up a keyword and enter it. I mean, look, I think it's a great idea, but you know, Mark said, well, 700 hours, you can't really remember all of that.
no, I'm saying,
you can't even watch it.
saying that the Editors Guild, guild, or whatever you call it, as a whole, should have a standard and insist. This is the standard.
It's like
It's a guild, not a
people need to
union.
do it. They need to do it.
No,
at the
they need to
beginning.
do it.
They need to do
And
it at the
speaking
beginning
as
of the project.
somebody that's always been the assistant editor, and I think a very good one, all the stuff has to be logged, and it has to be, named, and it has to be done properly. But poor editors are such browbeaten creatures. It's true, that's got to stop. The editors have to stand up.
But one thing I talk about, it could be useful, even if it's a website that has particular paths, protocols, naming conventions, things like that. Here is an example. Okay, you're going to start shooting something. Blah, 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 blah. This is a path you could take. And that this has been, you know, shaken down by some people who actually know what they're doing. Someone can just pull it up and hopefully get part of it right.
Yes.
And people have to start talking about how the film's going to be finished. What
Yeah, is this all
from
about
the beginning, they need to
editing?
know how it's going to finish at the end. Because
Pre-production, but post-production was, well, what are your delivery items?
Yeah.
That's the first thing you've got to
because otherwise you end up at the post-production facility with this complete
Wrong.
chamois.
Exactly.
And it costs a fortune.
You mean it's going to be in 4K?
Yeah.
So
Well,
my
that's
old DB camera isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, and I haven't retranscoded the GoPro. There's no time code on it. Oh my God, what do we do now?
We haven't heard from a few people.
I'd like to hear a bit about distribution as well as editing, because
Okay.
a lot of this is right over the top of my head. I don't know what all these words are, but I know about
GLAs.
film. I've been doing it 45 years. So I want to hear about new methods of distribution and all the other things that impinge on editors.
DCP, the digital cinema package, which is like how cinemas now run it.
Oh yeah, anything that's sort of very, very much in the future, I'm interested in hearing about. I don't know if other people are or not.
Can I ask a question about DCP very quickly? Is it the editor's responsibility? Do you just have the finished file in, say, Apple ProRes or 2K, whatever it is, and then you give it to who? Who does the DCP?
Well, DCPs aren't that challenging really, and like if I'm happy to forego any kind of proprietary marketing interest, you can download a program called OpenDCP and do it yourself.
Oh, you can't, can you?
But as editors, you will be making a master in ProRes at high definition, or if possible, 4K for future-proofing, and that's if you shoot it in 4K. And I think a lot of cameras are coming out that shoot in 4K, and we're going to be forced to handle that in the edit suite just because everybody's shooting with it. And in fact, you probably won't be able to buy it, just like you can't buy a standard definition camera now. In 5 years' time, you won't be able to buy a high definition camera. You'll be buying 4K cameras. So you master to the highest format you can. Preferably somebody like Roen will finish it and make it look beautiful. And then you find your distributors. Can be something like Distrify, which is a really interesting example of where the future is. So that's distrify.com. It's a UK company who market themselves to independent producers and filmmakers and give you a way to charge people to do your own publicity, which you're probably much better at doing on the internet than anybody else's, because you know your market. You can market it around the world, and Distrify do all things. They even do things like handling regions, doing geo-blocking. So for instance, if you sold the rights to Australia to a broadcaster, you could still possibly be it depends what you've signed with your Australian broadcaster, but if you said, I just assign the Australian rights to you, you could then go off to Distrify and distribute your stuff through Distrify and be able to put previews on the internet and be able to charge people $5 to view the actual thing. And I know from my experience, I've often found documentaries that I wanted to watch and would have, without a moment's thought, if I could have gone to the filmmaker's website and paid $5, I would have done it. But instead I've gone to YouTube and Vimeo and I've found dubbed Italian versions and things like that just to watch the thing. So
Isn't that where Avid's a bit ahead of the market with Avid everywhere?
I don't think, no, to be honest. I think where Avid is, that they've got rid of all the engineers and they've got a bunch of marketing people in there coming with impressive slogans. And in fact, you see it with, for instance, Avid 7 to Avid 8. There was no difference apart from the licensing options. And they talk a fantastic talk, but there's no actual real product and stuff behind it. So the idea is you master to a very high format like ProRes or DNX HD 185 or 220 in Avid, and then you find your distribution channels and they tell you exactly what they need, and it's very easy to just with a computer. It doesn't need special tools. You don't need digibeta players, HD Cam SR, stuff like that. It's all file based, so all it needs is a computer to do that transcoding.
There's a world of pain there though in terms of distribution, and it's about things like formats 14 by 9, 16 by 9, and particularly when you come to titles. And you can be sure that, and if you've got foreign subtitles, all that stuff, and so you can be sure that if you're taking it upon yourself to create the master, then
it will be wrong. Yes.
It'll be wrong.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
It sort of sounds great to be able to do your self-distribution thing, but they just come at you with all sorts of specs that you didn't even know existed.
I guess I'm thinking about a world in 5 years' time when all the broadcasters have shut up shop. And we only watch things on computers, and it doesn't matter what the format is, and it doesn't matter what the frame rate is, or the...
There's no safe area
but it's
anymore.
not there, and how do we make a living in the meantime? Well, I guess that's not my... I'm just a technician.
I can't believe it. Last year, when we delivered it to Sunny Boy, they still wanted the master on digibeta.
Really?
And it's
It has this ABC.
there's a new digital.
That's a little.
Oh, sorry.
Nothing.
HD file-based delivery. I just got specs from SBS.
Yes, I helped put that together.
MXF OP1A.
It's a terrible idea. They didn't realise it. I actually spend a lot of time talking with it. What happens is with that SBS delivery format is that they ask the AV technicians, what are we broadcasting at? And of course they said MXF50, which is a very compressed format. And you would not want to have your final master that you produce everything from at MXF50. But because they asked their technicians were never going to see it at a higher level. You would see it at a higher level on YouTube than MXF50, and you would, YouTube can handle 4K, and it's
still very compressed when YouTube does 4K.
Well, it depends. If you're watching it over the non-NBN, it's very compressed. And but the future is. The broadcasting, the standards aren't important because it's just a computer and the computer can play anything. But I realise that we are still living in a world where ABC still asks for digibetas, and where SBS has moved to a format on LTO that I mentioned before, but because it's their broadcasting format, it's not a mastering format. They just want, just like the digibeta, they want what they can broadcast without having to do anything with it. As a producer, as the film owner, you want to make sure you've got the proper master at a high to repurpose and for future proofing.
Mark, you had a question?
I wanted to ask a question about 4K. At the ACS 50th anniversary, there was a discussion led by a fellow from, is it eFilm in Los Angeles?
It could be.
Yeah.
Could have been.
And they said that 4K is just crap. That in fact, technically, it can't really be achieved.
Well, there's all sorts of things. I actually do a course called Demystifying Data, where I talk for 7 hours about all these things. And yes, you're right. It's as a distribution format. It's often with the TVs that Sony and people are trying to flog us. It's 8-bit. It's not got all that. There's much better ways to make better quality. But the reality is that Netflix and Amazon are now saying that anything that they buy has to be in 4K. So as a...
It's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. It is irrelevant. It's a marketing slogan for them, and it's a marketing slogan for Sony. But as filmmakers, we have to make what they ask for. And all the cameras of the future are going to shoot 4K anyway. I mean, it's certainly makes...
4K.
What?
Some are stretched.
I was just going to say, we just blow it up.
Yeah.
Yes.
deliver it to Amazon. It started off on DV, but now it's 4K.
Yeah.
Oh, not really.
Well, and at the end of the day, the important thing anyway is the story and how it you know, if it's an interesting story, if it's moving. But the cameras are shooting 4K, and that information is there. It's, you know, just because...
They said it couldn't be projected.
Well, the projectors in all the cinemas are 2K, but people at home have 4K TVs now. If you go into JB Hi-Fi, it's full of 4K TVs.
But there's no content for it.
Well,
You've got a 4K TV blowing HD up to 4K.
If you sign up for Netflix or Amazon, although you can't in this country, you could start watching the 4K
not available
content.
in your region, yeah.
Yes.
But are you saying that on TV, in effect?
Yes, I am saying
4K
that.
is legitimately, technically better than something else.
4K TVs will show you that many pixels if you've got them, whereas 2K...
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, you know, and the thing is, and it's just like when HD came out, and I was told this very intriguing way of looking at it, and that is, you can have a picture the same size as your old TV, that's, you know, 2.5 times better, or you can have a picture that's 2.5 times as big, that's just as good. And I mean, 4K is just an extension of that. And uncompressed 4K would be fantastic. But I mean, I don't think we'll ever see that. Well, not.
I think we probably will, but
not for the next decade, maybe.
No. But it doesn't. The difference between standard definition and high definition and 4K isn't like going from standard definition to high definition is something we can all appreciate. You don't appreciate 4K that much. There's a lot of marketing slogan, but it will just happen because it does. I mean, we have computer screens with, you know, like our iPhones have you know, incredible amounts of pixels on them, just because it makes it look like you can't see the pixels anymore. At the moment with cinema projection, all the digital projection systems are 2K anyway. But they will be 4K, but it won't make a huge difference to the audience. They'll still like a great film and they'll still hate a bad film. But it is, we as editors and in post-production, we're going to have to manage that. And particularly if, while the ABC still asking for standard definition digibeta, places like the future distributors are asking for 4K, and they see it as a differentiation for them. And we have the opportunity to give them that.
So how is your iMac handling something that is shot on 4K
Yes.
on a camera in Premiere Pro?
Okay, it can play it automatic without doing anything, but you have the problem with you have to have very fast drives, you have to have fast everything. Now things are getting faster. We've talked about USB 3, we've talked about Thunderbolt, things like that. We've talked about disk arrays, but it's still with 4K, what I would recommend is actually going online, offline.
Yeah.
FCPX has a concept of always transcoding everything in the background, just like FCP7 you used to have manually. You have this idea of editing proxies, where you will get your red files, where you would get your 4K Alexa stuff, and you would drag it all in and it would all be there. And in the background, the computer's chugging away, turning it all into high definition ProRes, which is what you're actually editing. And computers, as they get more and more powerful, are very good at doing that boring stuff.
So in this post pathway that you're describing in 4K, that all of a sudden, already is landing on our desks as editors.
Yes.
You're suggesting that transcode to an offline resolution.
Yes.
Now you're going to transcode everything. Are you going to take your 4K of all of your rushes? Because I mean, we're talking again most long-got formats, aren't
Yes.
they?
Yes.
Or are you just going to
I think at
go
the
back to
moment
4K off your final cut?
you are going to go back to 4K for your final cut. So you are going to bring your
post path
around
that.
For your final cut? For
your finishing.
To
for your online.
700 hours at 4K,
Yes.
or are you going to reconnect to...
What you'll find is the programs have got very, very good. DaVinci Resolve is really, really good at managing that. In fact, DaVinci is quite a common tool to make your offlines within DaVinci, to edit those offlines, and DaVinci knows about all the connections between the offline and the online versions, and then when you export your FCP XML or your AAFs, DaVinci is very good at reconnecting all of that.
I guess what I'm talking about here is actually that 4K file. Are we talking about a copy of the card?
Yes, definitely a copy of the card.
Which is mounted?
Yes.
And it's reconnecting to that?
Yes. Yes,
Right, okay.
that's exactly what I'm saying.
So there's a
DaVinci will
management
do
process
that.
there.
Oh yeah, very much.
That if your director turns up with 700 hours, could actually fall apart.
Yeah, at the moment, we only, you wouldn't find, what you'll find if you've got 700 hours is that 75% of that will be GoPros and
No, not necessarily.
and DSLRs. And although this DSLR here is shooting 4K now, and but they will.
You have to have an external recorder.
You
don't
do have to have an external recorder. Good point. And it doesn't have one, does it, Erica? No.
They're very hard to get at the moment. We're trying to get one at work. And
Oh, I might be able to sort you out.
oh, please do. At the end of the day, at the end of the night.
So the MPEG, as opposed to uncompressed, is a really interesting thing, and it's one of the things that Premiere have been known to warn you about, at least in the previous version. They've got a product called...
Media encoder?
No, what's the colour?
Prelude? Oh, Speed Grade.
Speed Grade, which I haven't actually used, although I've got it. And previously they warned you, you might have shot a long GOP sort of thing, and let's say that might be 1/16th, maybe. If, imagining you're shooting me against a blank background, then I could be 1/16th of the uncompressed data. If it's a 16
It's very small,
frame,
yes.
So
the camera card's small.
because I'm just sitting here against a big blank wall, moving a little bit, and so it takes very little data. But then, if you export that, in the old days, the previous version of Premiere, they wanted to make DPX files to go into Speed Grade. So
Yeah, that's right.
that suddenly it's like at least
huge.
times 16.
Yeah.
Your 100 gig of data is now
10 terabytes.
Yeah, some terabytes.
And also, because the data's big, the problem isn't just the size and storage, it's always the bandwidth.
It's not an iMac. So, we're going to cut something that's been shot on 4K. We're going to be cutting it perhaps at a ProRes resolution with real frames, because it really runs really nicely. But when we get to the final, we're going to take all those cards, or the backups of all the disk images of all of those cards to Roen, who's going to extract those and create the massive files that we're going to use for the online and the delivery. And Roen's going to reconnect it to our sequence. Is that correct? Is it?
Yeah, well, that
It
basically
doesn't work all that well with FCP7 though.
Oh,
That's
no,
another reason.
No, but that's the point that I'm making, is that if we're working in our front
Yes.
room, which is how we're all doing it,
Yes.
we're not going to have the gear that Roen's going to have that can drive those full uncompressed frames that are going to be the basis of our master.
Yes.
Well, basically correct. And, I've done a project recently on FCP, Premiere Pro, where it was 4-camera shoot on Blackmagic. And my system was staggering a little bit with a multicam 4 cameras.
Wow.
So I just went and ran all the reels through Media Encoder, took it right down to just an MPEG-4, tiny file size, down from, hundreds of gigs to tens of gigs,
Is that for your offline edit?
Yeah,
well,
so
sort
you
of
can
for an
do a
offline
craft
edit.
yes.
So I can sit there and
Yeah.
edit and choose all my cut points. The quality of the footage, it's not as bad as Avid in the old days where you're editing on shower screen footage, you can actually see what you're talking to. And then once you're ready, then it's a similar media manage like a Final Cut, right? But then, before you do your AAF for exporting to your online platform, you hide all of that media that you've been working with,
And then read
and say, no,
Really?
that the media you're looking for is over there. Oh, right.
Yeah.
And what it does, it just ignores the extensions. It just looks at the file name.
Right.
So your file name might be filename.mov, and then you proxy it down to your filename.mp4, work with the MP4s until you're done, and then you go back and say, no, it's those .movs over there, and then you do the AAF, and then across the network it pulls all the footage in, and home and hose.
And you're doing
Sounds good, doesn't it?
you're finishing, yeah. Of course, there's a few glitches.
Well, a few glitches, but
Yeah.
you're not there for that.
So how do we best deliver all our rich YouTube and our
Yes.
GoPro stuff? How do we up-res that or so it mixes well with the 4K stuff?
Well, you do your best. There's no surefire. You know, there's various plugins and things. You know,
Just one.
black boxes, smoke and mirrors, but there's no real surefire. And you know, if it's crap footage, it's probably going to end up being crap footage.
Okay. There's no particular file type we should deliver it as.
Oh, well, you know, I mean, there's file types. You know, to be sure, these MP-based formats, I'm just discovering as being fantastic. And in the past, I've avoided them
Because
for
you
the
couldn't
same
play
reason.
them in SCP7.
And other systems where getting inside that long GOP, a GOP is a group of pictures, right? And so that group of pictures, MPEG calls a frame, you know, even though there's all that. So I still like ProRes, I still like uncompressed, but you know, I mean, even ProRes, I look at, you know, an uncompressed, if you put out a TIFF sequence of a 1.5 hour program, it'll probably come in at 1.2 terabytes. But if you do a ProRes of the same thing, it's only about 102 gig. So where's the other 800 gig gone?
Well,
You
there's
know,
rows
it's
of...
compression.
Yes.
And there has to be some impact. Although I've got to say, my efforts to try and fail ProRes have failed. You know, ProRes is pretty impressive. And look, I've even been looking at AVI lately, which is kind of the PC version of ProRes.
Are you talking 444 or are you talking...
I'm 4422. I mean, look, you know, if you're a documentary maker, you aren't necessarily wanting to put out a stereo 4K 3D, you know, at 50p, which is just humongous amount of space. You're aiming for beauty. You want it to look as good as you can, you know, and that's planning that starts at the beginning. You know, you tailor your production for your needs, and shoot as high as you can, I think.
I think
Andrew, what are the problems you're having in your particular one at the moment?
Well, the volume of material was a huge issue. I couldn't even begin to tell you how much footage I got because it was shot over 3 years. There was a drama shoot involved, which was actually quite controlled, but the actual Vietnam footage, which was the search for some bodies, the volume of material, I'm in the second last week of the edit now, and I'm still kind of discovering stuff I've never seen. And there's probably stuff I'll probably never see. So
did David censor any of it or keep anything from you? Or
no.
Did he do a rough cut before you saw it?
No.
So you saw the raw footage?
Well, I haven't seen all of the footage. There's no way that I could sit and watch all of it.
He doesn't wave the camera around, he turns on and off.
What do you mean?
Well, I've looked, for various reasons, I've looked at everything that he's shot, you know, sometimes.
No, he does. I
And
mean,
he turns off, he doesn't just...
No, he does, but he does let things run. I mean, he just shoots a lot.
Yeah, but it's
Because
all
it's just
meaningful.
he's always got his camera with him, he's always shooting.
It's always in his mind meaningful.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
That's
some
exactly.
people wave it around.
No, I'm not saying he just lets it run
Yeah.
for the sake of he does button off, but he's just always shooting. He's always got his camera with him. He's always shooting. So there's just a lot of material, and in his mind, I don't think we've missed any of kind of the salient moments. I mean, there was a few things he said, let's go there and look at that, and we would go there. But from an editor's point of view, you always there's something you're going to see that they're not going to see that you might have missed.
Yeah.
So,
So you do end up seeing most of the rushes.
well, you can't sit and watch hours and hours. I mean, I don't know how many hours there are. Jenny, do you have any idea? There's 2 shoots over 2 years in Vietnam. There's
I think there's probably less than 100.
overall.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
maybe
given
it's
that
just-
people are talking hundreds, yeah.
Then there's all the interviews that he did here, which are
Yeah.
with the
Another
veterans.
30 or something like that,
Mm.
yeah, you're right.
Do people still do transcripts?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you
Crucial,
can meet,
crucial.
If you like
you can
it.
search on those.
Tom, I wanted to ask you about your experience of editing a rough cut as a director, you know, which is obviously different to years gone by when the editor might have done the whole thing and you might have sat there. How does that work, you know, passing it over to the editor and also you getting on top of all that technology?
I'm doing it right now. And I've been preparing for weeks before Ray Thomas comes in and looks at the material. So I normally do, I guess, I hike out at least 50%. Often because I'm exploring the film and exploring characters at the same time, certain characters may not be working, and and I might drop them and say, look, let's ignore 3 or 4 or maybe a dozen reels. Usually not that many.
Do you log it? Is it all logged?
It's logged, but I have my own method of doing it. What I do is I work out the scenes that are critical, that are relevant, that are important, and really spend a lot of time on those scenes. And then I have another bin which just says essentially visual material, cutaway material, background material, which could fit in between the major scenes. But essentially it's chronological. And I think probably in this current run what I'm doing is most of the scenes that I filmed I'm using, but I'm cutting them down, maybe a 3-4 to 1 ratio. It just makes things easier for Ray when he comes back in, so he doesn't see 80 hours, he sees maybe 20.
So what's his role more? Is it a structural role or is it more of a polishing role? Right.
It's both. He helps me, well, we work on scenes together and we get them down as much as we possibly can in the first run through. Some scenes stay long, some of the more critical scenes, almost right through to the end, and then they come down to a reasonable size, but we get them down to something manageable as much as we can, and often that's a 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes, and those scenes could come down yet more in the end. But the important thing here is getting the structure working after you cut the scenes down to something that where you can sort of work them around the film. Although what I'm doing at the moment, this particular film is pretty much chronological anyway. Certain structure is self-evident, on others it's not.
So who's on the controls after the rough cut? Is that you or Ray? Or do you take turns?
Well, he comes in, this film after film for 3 or 4 weeks about this stage. I'm about halfway through the shoot at the moment. And he helps me sort of, well, gives me feedback. What's working, what's not working. I've got one major character, and if it works occasionally, it works mostly, I hope. and other side characters, and certain scenes that we probably both agree on were pretty important, and at the moment some of them are running at about 40 minutes, and in the first run through over 3 or 4 weeks those scenes will come down to 5 or 10, and then I'll keep on shooting, and then there'll be another period of 3 or 4 weeks where we'll work on new material, plus come back to the old scenes and probably cut them down further. And then usually there's a run at the end of maybe 12, 14 weeks, all up 20 weeks. So this period can, for me, usually happens over 18 months. In this case, this current film could be 3 or 4 years.
Could I just chuck in one more thing about the 4K, to go back to that, the 4K sort of workflow? There's an emerging scenario which is probably worth being aware of. I think there's Panasonic released a camera called the GH4, which probably everyone will hear about sooner or later. It's very cheap, which is very popular in documentary, I'm sure you know. And it's a DSLR. It's about, you can get about $1,600. It does 4K and Ultra HD, both varieties of it.
Very good.
And as you know, uncompressed 4K as well if you've got an external recorder. It also does, just as importantly, it does 1080 really high bit rates, ABC Intra and all that, but also 96 frames with a push of a button, up to 96 frames. So, but not at 4K, only at HD, at 1080. So especially with a documentary type project, I can see a scenario where the shooter mixes and matches.
Yes, has various frame rates.
Yeah, from one scene to the next.
Yes, yes.
If they want to blow it up, like, I mean, one of the initial promises of the 4K was really, even if you're finishing HD, it's about being able to blow it up.
Yeah, an interview, being able to turn it into something you can cut between shots, and that's very useful. That's all stuff that that we just have to handle. You'll find that Premiere can handle it without you having to think about it too much as a craft editor. And they do what computers are good at. They do all that stuff in the background, whereas FCP7 can't do that, has no concept of any other frame rates apart from 25 frames a second. And so, yeah, you will find it's not too hard, but then if you've got 4K and you've got high frame rates as well, then you've got problems because you need to transcode it. So there is a good point about, I think you talked about we need standards to evolve. When I do my courses on demystifying data, I talk about how we've got roles like the clapper loader, we've got roles like the camera operator, which have evolved over 100 years. And with working with file-based cameras, we're working with something that's changing every minute. You know, the GH4 has been out for about 6 months. The A7S has been out for about 5 weeks, 5 days, and we're constantly having to evolve our workflow to fit in with these fabulous formats. And it's impossible to work out an exact workflow, but all we can do is try and understand the formats as much as possible and try and maintain the best quality we can based on our equipment through the thing. And so we can't give you exact answers because we're working it out as we go along. We're solving problems.
How is Premiere Pro better or different from Final Cut 10, which I only looked at it a year ago, and the audio tracks, you couldn't control them, apparently you can now. They don't have tracks.
It doesn't have tracks. It's a whole different ballgame. It has this idea of a magnetic timeline, which is just an absolute anathema to an old school editor, where if you want to put a clip in between two, the other clips all get out of the way and all your footage gets pushed up to the end of it's just unbelievable. If you've been working in FCP7 for years, it's just too big of a jump to go to FCPX. It's just a totally different way of telling a story. Whereas you'll find that Premiere Pro feels very comfortable as you can.
Is it functional? I mean, say you spent the time You know, does
learning.
it work as well as Premiere Pro?
Oh, it produces exactly the same results. It respects your footage and the original camera material and can produce something, can be graded in DaVinci Resolve. So it's not going to compromise the look of everything. It's a way of thinking about telling a story, and it's a very different way of telling a story. So
It doesn't put out OMFs, or the last time I used it.
or one of the things about FCPX is because Apple sell 3 million copies to have it selling 30. People make things for it, and so you can buy a plug-in that will produce an OMF.
I'm not convinced it's a great NLE for long format still. I think
No,
it's got a
definitely
long
not.
way to go. In fact, I think it's great for stuff you want to upload to the web. Short form, you know, really quick stuff.
It's a
you don't even
different-
have to think about a color grade or whatever.
Yeah.
It's got all these, you know, little stuff, but it's not a great long format.
Having
NLE.
said that, it might, like, you would have said that about FCP7 10 years ago. And it
I
evolved.
thought it was always good for long format.
Well,
Sorry, I
people
disagree.
said, you know, you can't have a timeline that's longer than 4 hours and things like that in the early days, which is a real problem when you're in a stage that Tom's in, where he's got all his scenes long. And also, it's incredibly slow to, FCP7 is incredibly slow to open when you get very long timelines. Whereas, and so, but it did. It was used like that. I forgot what my point was, but I'm sure it was very important.
Whether 10's good for OMFs and exporting, and
it's what you want to do with it. And I don't think, if you've been making documentaries for years, I don't think you want to go down that path. I think if you're starting off, you'll find it really easy to tell stories like that, but it's such a different way of telling a story.
So do you think they did it? Do you think they were trying to get rid of all their...
I know exactly why they did it, because they wanted...
Yes, well, my conjecture, and it's, well, I'll jump in on Mark for a second. When Apple made the iPad, they discovered that they could sell 60 million units in 6 months.
Yeah.
And then they went, oh my God, let's reevaluate the entire Apple product catalogue.
Yeah, that's true.
And they go, well, hang on, we've got this product here called Final Cut Pro. It's used by 100,000 skilled professionals worldwide. And they ring us up and they go, it says in the manual that if you put that bit in there and it's not working for me, and they go, no, right? And then all of a sudden they look at their iPad success and they go, well, why bother having a product for 100,000 skilled professionals when we could have 10 million skateboard video makers? And so they've gone for 10 million skateboard video makers.
That's exactly, they put their profits above
of course.
their friggin'
No,
artistry.
it's a
went like that.
philosophy. It's a philosophy.
It's a strong
about
company.
They always say at the bottom of all their stuff, ignited the personal computer revolution. And that's what they do. They make products for individuals. They don't make things for... Avid make products for professionals. Adobe make products for professionals. Apple don't make products for professionals. It may have a pro in it, but...
But the irony is their hardware is.
Well, not really.
Yeah.
I read an article out of...
Sorry, no, you go.
I read an article out of Harvard or somewhere, IT department, saying that the release of, prior to Mavericks, Apple appeared to be further distancing themselves from any form of professional networking.
Well, they killed the server. It's going to be fridges next.
It's white goods.
They just want you to keep buying the newest thing, and for it to go out of date, so you've got to get the newest thing. And
But
from what you've been
the newest
talking
thing
like,
is
it's
twice
like-
as fast as the old thing. So it does make a difference to us editors. One of the things you'll find if you... I did a lot of work with Apple, and I'm very familiar with their products. Premiere Pro and also After Effects, which you get with Creative Cloud, and also FCPX, really use the GPUs, the graphics processing unit, in new computers, and it makes a huge... You can't believe how easy it is to edit compared with what you think of as a grunty, not grumpy, I think that's grumpy, a grunty Mac Pro sitting there. These iMacs with the 4 gig GPU card, and these little Mac Pros with their dual GPU cards make an enormous difference to the way you edit, because you don't have to sit there like we all used to do and still do probably, and it's rendering time. You can always have a bit of a break, bit of a chat, and the faster computers do make your editing better, I would suggest, because you can be more creative.
I was just going to say that the fact, what you're saying means that editors now are continually having to learn new technology, and that's like a lot of your time would be spent doing that.
No, I don't think so. I think there's a bit of certainly, I don't think with Premiere Pro you have to learn new technology. You have to learn, the technology isn't driving you. If you go from all the other NLEs we've talked about to FCPX, yes, you do have to find a different way of working. But I wouldn't say with Premiere and FCP7 you're not having to learn lots of new technology. You're having to manage a lot of footage, which is not something you want to be doing as a creative storyteller. But generally, you're not continually having to be confronted by new things. I think there's a huge leap for us documentary makers, because I think we've seen it, lots and lots of people sort of, like I did, base their careers around FCP7, and it's a very comfortable tool to use to tell a story. But we're also spending a long time sitting there watching rendering, transcoding our footage before we even start. And in fact, you can just make one leap to Adobe products and you'll find a lot of that pain is taken out, and a lot of the good things about, some people have said, for instance, FCP is a bit like, Premiere is a bit like FCP8. It's all the things you dreamed of having, because we all thought it was going to keep getting upgraded, and all the things that irritated us, like using DSLR footage being rendered, are gone, but they never did. And they never did, but then a lot of that is fixed in Premiere Pro, but it's very familiar.
Mark, we were saying earlier on that there's a good chance that in 10 years' time we might be using X, and one of the stuff was about. Do you really think so? Because
yes, I do.
To me, that Apple's trajectory seems to be squarely toward the home skateboarders.
No, yes, they're about young people telling stories. And I think it's a different, what they haven't done, they didn't say, how can we upset all those professionals? Yes, because they didn't care. They couldn't care less. What they did was they looked at media and what media we have. And of course, the old days of NLEs, we had tapes. All the other programs are based around tapes. Nowadays, we have lots and lots of footage, and we look at it in a different way. Lots and lots of media, and we look at it in a different way. And they've just said, well, if the Steenbeck had never been invented and the moviola had never been invented, and the idea of bins and all the source monitor had never been invented, how would you start? How would somebody who never ever knew about that, how would they start with taking a whole bunch of material and telling a story with it? And that's what they've done, which is what they're kind of good at. And I think I've been working with Apple products. Freudian slip. I've been working with Apple products for about 25 years, and you think, oh, they've really spoilt it, and you think, I think they've blown it this time, but they've always been right so far. And I really think that people coming from not knowing about Steenbecks or not knowing about Avid, just playing with them media to tell a story, that's how they're going to tell stories. They're not going to discover, they're not interested in the history of what bins were. And there used to be these cloth bins, and it's almost laughable.
How do they sort it then?
I could go into, FCPX has this idea of events, and you keyword everything, and it's just like Google. You keyword everything, all the bits that are interesting, and you do a search, and it gives you a list of all the things that you've keyworded. Yes, I mean, it is fabulous. They've really, really thought a lot about it. And, you know, it's very different. And if you're used to telling stories another way, it's not helpful. But if you've never played with the material before, then it's fantastic.
But you can't do it with 700 hours.
You can actually, it's much better for 700 hours because it has this whole idea of you don't hit play and see everything at 25 frames. You skim through, think, oh, that's a good bit. Now I'll go in that slowly. I'll mark that. I'll give it a keyframe. I'll give it a keyword, and I've got a whole bunch of keywords that I've already defined, and then you move on to another bit. So it's actually very, very good, and in fact probably better than the traditional way for 700 hours.
There's a question about the long time.
Question.
Yes.
If you've got the situation where you've got an editor and an assistant or two editors,
Yes.
is and sharing the same media.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes, it is. What Premiere has, originally we thought you couldn't do that in Premiere because you can only have one project open at a time, and we're used to having multiple projects open, or we're used to having bins that can be locked by one person but opened by somebody else. But the way it works in Premiere is you have the media browser and you can open other people's projects in a read-only way. You can see their sequences in a read-only way, and you can import the things you want into your project to use them. So it does work quite well. Premiere, Adobe are really working hard on that, and they've just announced a whole bunch of upgrades to that media browser process just this week. But you've worked in an editor assistant way with Adobe, with Premiere, haven't you?
But to be honest, when we were using it, and it was on the incarnation before the CC, was it? It wasn't great. And it was a bit of a reel around. You had to export, import thingos, and it has this horrendous thing where it brings the media back in again in a folder. So you keep on getting another folder of the same media in your display, and if you try and get rid of it, then it says, well, you're going to lose it.
Takes a lot of your timeline, yeah.
So that's really a pain in the ass. But we did figure out a way around that. But, you know, it's the usual thing.
Has that gone?
Yeah, we
Yes, when you bring the stuff in now, it organises, it asks you if you want to bring it in. So it's got much more sophisticated.
Do you want to bring the media in? No.
Yeah.
No, so you can bring it in.
Mm-hmm.
So Andrea, given you, and I don't know who else of you have worked across various NLEs, what's your tool of choice?
Premiere, and I'll tell you, Premiere, and it's because, number one, the lack of wrangling is fantastic. You just pull stuff in. And the other thing to really, and we actually just sent a crew out on the documentary I'm working on next, and we did that. We made them, we set them down, got the camera people, the crew together, and of course the camera guys have just been foisted on with this media wrangling job. You know, it's still a job that isn't properly allocated on the shoot. So somebody gets lumbered with it, they're all late at night, they're knackered, half pissed, they stick the cards in, they know it's really important to get it right, but you know, like it's quite likely going to be a bit of a mess. So we try and set it up so they go out with the right software on their laptop and a system for folders and
naming
stuff like
convention,
that.
yes.
And the sound guy as well. But what really is obvious is that there's a real disconnect between the sound and the camera, and so the person who's doing the sound will just go, oh well, I'm going to plug it in there, and there's these guys that had never talked about how that was going to work, how many tracks they were going to use, stuff like that, and then they do that, you might get the rushes back. I've had a situation where the rushes came in with 8 tracks of audio on every clip.
Oh my God.
4 of them were mute.
Dramas like that all the time.
4. I mean, how the hell do you manage that when you get to the cut stage? You don't want to get rid of the clips, particularly, except now I've found out that you can actually get rid of all the clips, and then when you get to the sound post, they can match it all in and get them all back again, but that's news to me.
So you're getting that as single system, or are you getting that as double system?
Oh, that was in a single system, thankfully. But double system was another thing. It just suddenly arrived again, you know. Suddenly there's SLR, and it's like, oh my God, and no one knows how to sync.
Oh, Adobe does. They do pluralize this. One of the reasons people have been able to use so much dual sound stuff is because pluralize syncs on audio sound. So for instance, if you've got a helicopter, if you've got a camera outside a helicopter, it's got very different sound from...
It's not drama, but not documentary.
Yes, so yeah, it doesn't... But so now FCPX and Premiere Pro have that functionality built into them.
Matching camera mic.
Mod matching, yeah.
Yeah.
Mod matching.
So Karen, how did you go then?
With which
You
one?
had an assistant.
With your 10?
Marcus from Macquarie wrangled it all. He
Something.
made them all into group clips for me, thank God, before I started.
For the multicam.
For the multicam.
Yeah.
But then they had a massive problem with the online, the AEFs didn't match back. So now they've graded off a ProRes spit out because they could never go back to the GoPro.
Oh.
Jesus wept.
Why was that?
Oh, there was just some technical issue because they didn't know how they were going to finish. And saying, but you can't help it if you're working on a film that's not funded, not commissioned.
Yeah.
You don't know how.
And you hit an online that charges like a wounded bull.
What's the best naming convention? Is there any consensus or?
Oh, I have something. You want to start with, I'll just generally outline what I suggest, is you start with a 3-letter acronym for the project. You always want short things. Somebody mentioned that they had a director who named everything very long. It's an absolute nightmare in post-production, trying to manage in a file system, long names. So you define all this. You have 3 characters for the project, then a underscore or a hyphen, then the date, preferably in reverse order, because it makes it very easy to sort. So you go year, month, day. Then you have the camera. So it's important that you have a meeting before you go out shooting and say, this is the A camera, this is the B camera, this is the C camera, etc., and write all that down. And then you have a bunch of cards, and each camera has its own set of cards. You don't swap cards between cameras, and so you would have card 1, card 2, card 3, card 4 for the one camera. And so the data wrangler gets a card from the camera and it says this is from camera A, this is card 1, and they can put that into the file naming convention. And so that's basically how I would define a naming convention. And you end up with a bunch of folders all corresponding to cards. These could be cards from GoPros, these could be cards from Red Mags, they could be, but they're all treated as individual items, individual reels, tapes, whatever you want to call them, and they all have this naming convention.
Still impossible to get a clip naming convention, that's one bugger. It's really hard to get that.
Something brief that means something to you.
Yes.
Brief as you can.
It has to be brief.
That means something.
You mean in the logging, inside the NLE?
Well,
No, this is
just the file name.
No, not the file name. That's the name of the card. So you see all the clips within there. And as Andrea says, it depends. If you've got some cameras, like for instance the Blackmagic cameras. The thing about Blackmagic is they are a post-production company. They know what people want in post-production, so you can actually name every clip according to a defined thing. But if you buy a Sony camera or a Canon camera, you get gibberish for each of the file names. But you can define your tape, if you like, or your reel or your card. So the card is what we generally work with. In the future you will be able to define the clips, but the cameras aren't quite there. Arja have just brought out, who are another post-production company, have brought out a camera which is the same, which allows you to put in metadata, because this is all metadata, which is of use to the post-production. Now, metadata for post-production isn't a big selling point when you're selling a camera to a DOP, but it is important. And so we're still on a journey, but for the moment, the place I think we need to be is we define all our cards as having a certain name, and that convention is agreed before the shoot. And that's what's happened on the
Pokey thing,
the Pokey thing, that we've actually just sent them off, and we've said this is how you copy all the cards, and you copy them all into one big disc. You don't try and put them in some sort of hierarchy, and this is how you name them. You say the project's called...
Ka-ching.
No, 3 characters. KAC. Then the date, then the camera, and then the card within the camera.
We're going to have to cut it short, I think, everybody. It's getting close to 5 to 9, yeah? And Roen has to go, I know, but
I'm sorry.
very quickly. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank the panellists very, very much for their contributions. It's been a really valuable discussion, I think, and it's all been recorded as well. Thank you.